Chapter 2. The Chemistry of Life. Biology was once almost entirely natural history, which is learning to recognize organisms and discovering where they live. Then came descriptive biology. Scientists, armed with hand lenses and microscopes, described in minute detail the structures of everything that grew, crept, or flew, as well as a few things that were not even alive. With the use of new technologies, biologists started describing smaller and smaller parts of life forms. Now they are describing the basic substances of life. A scientific revolution happened because biology needed the models of another branch of science to better describe life. For this reason, you must first understand chemistry, the study of substances and the rules that govern their behavior, in order to understand biology. Whether in a test tube or in a living cell, all substances behave according to God-ordained rules. 2A. Basic Chemistry. 2.1 Objectives. Define matter and energy. Describe the structure of an atom. Distinguish between atom, molecule, compound, and mixture. Describe covalent and ionic bonding. Differentiate between chemical and physical changes. Key terms: matter, element, atom, neutron, proton, electron, isotope, ionic bond, covalent bond, hydrogen bond, molecule, compound, chemical change. Physical change, mixture. 2.1 Matter. It is not always easy to distinguish the two basic components of the physical universe, matter and energy, because they exist and work together. For the sake of simplicity, this study of basic chemistry will consider each one separately. The simple definition of matter, although scientists are modifying it as they learn more about the physical universe, suffices here. Matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. Normally, there are three states of matter associated with life: solid, liquid, and gas. These states of matter are the result of varying amounts of energy possessed by that matter. If thermal energy is added to solid water, ice, the water will enter the liquid state. If more thermal energy is added to the water, it becomes a vapor, the gaseous state. Elements and atoms. Matter is composed of about 90 naturally occurring elements. Occasionally, scientists synthesize other elements in the laboratory, but usually these elements are highly unstable. Elements are pure substances that cannot be further broken down into simpler substances by ordinary chemical reactions. According to the atomic theory, if a piece of an element such as pure gold is cut in half, and then in half again and again and again, in time, there would be a piece that could not be cut again and still be gold. That piece would be an atom, the smallest unit of an element. Although nuclear reactions can break atoms apart, the products of these reactions are no longer the original element. A pure sample of an element consists entirely of the atoms of that element. The periodic table of the elements is an arrangement of the elements according to the structure of their atoms. This table displays the element symbols, usually the first letter or letters of the chemical names in Latin or English. The common elements found in living organisms are listed along with their symbols in Table 2-1. The first 5 elements listed are essential in large amounts. The next 6 elements are essential in smaller amounts. The rest of the elements in the table are trace elements, which are essential to some organisms only in tiny amounts. An atom is not solid like a marble. One model pictures an atom somewhat like the solar system, a central part and outer moving parts, with much empty space in between. In this model, the center of the atom is the nucleus, composed of neutrons, which have no charge, and of positively charged protons. Electrons, particles with a negative charge, constantly circle the nucleus within orbits or shells at varying distances from the nucleus. Although there are other kinds of subatomic particles, they are not discussed here. The electron shells are relatively distant from the nucleus. If a single oxygen atom were the size of a football field, the nucleus would be the size of a tennis ball in the center, and the electrons would be the size of pinheads circling the field at the distance of the goalposts. Most of matter, then, is empty space between the nucleus and the electrons of atoms. The matter that makes this book is quite solid, even though it is made of atoms that are mostly space. Strong forces hold the atoms of this book together, so that they form a solid substance. What forces hold electrons and protons together as atoms, and what forces bind atoms together? Scientists believe that the opposing charges of the electrons, minus, and the protons, plus, cause them to stay together as an atom. To understand what binds one atom to another, it is necessary to know about the atom's composition. Atoms of different elements vary in their number of electrons, protons, and neutrons. In a single atom, the number of electrons is always the same as the number of protons, and the positive and negative charges cancel each other, making the net charge of the atom zero, a neutral atom. If there is one proton in the nucleus and one electron in its shell, the atom is hydrogen. An atom with 8 protons, with the proper number of neutrons, in the nucleus, and 8 electrons is oxygen. All atoms of a particular element have the same number of protons. The element's atomic number indicates the number of protons in one atom. If the number of protons in an atom decreases or increases, the atom becomes a different element. Normally, the number of protons does not change except in nuclear reactions, as in atomic bomb explosions, nuclear power reactors, or stars. Many elements consist of atoms that, although they must have the same number of protons, can vary in their number of neutrons. Because neutrons have no charge, the atoms would still have the same charge but different masses. These atoms, which have the same number of protons but different numbers of neutrons, are called isotopes. Isotopes. Isotopes of an element have the same chemical properties because they have the same number of electrons. Carbon, one of the most common elements found in living things, has 3 different isotopes. Each isotope is identified by its mass number, which is the sum of the protons and neutrons in the nucleus. The 3 isotopes of carbon are carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. Chemical bonding ionic. Most atoms are unstable and will normally bond with other atoms to become more stable. An atom is most stable when its outermost electron shell is full. The innermost electron shell, which is the first to be filled, can contain only 2 electrons. The second shell can hold 8 electrons. The next shell has the potential to hold 18 electrons, but acts as if it were full when it has 8. The shells farther out hold larger numbers, but all behave as if they are full when they have 8. Atoms with naturally full shells are quite stable, such as the noble gases, helium, neon, argon, and so forth, located in the last column on the right side of the periodic table. Other atoms, especially if their outermost shells lack 1 or 2 electrons, or if they have only 1 or 2 electrons, will give, take, or share electrons to achieve a full outermost shell. Atoms that give, take, or share electrons to become more stable are chemically active. For example, an atom of chlorine, a chemically active nonmetal, has 17 electrons, 2 in the first shell, 8 in the second shell, and 7 in the third shell. If it gets 1 more electron, it will have a full outermost shell. Sodium, a chemically active metal, is just the opposite. It has 11 electrons, 2 in the first shell, 8 in the second, and 1 in the third. If it gives up its outermost electron, it will have a full second shell. When these 2 elements meet, sodium gives its outermost electron to chlorine, which takes it readily to fill its outermost shell. When this occurs, the 2 elements combine, forming a new substance, sodium chloride, common table salt. Sodium chloride is more chemically stable than the 2 elements that form it. Since one atom gives and the other takes an electron, the atoms of sodium and chlorine in salt each have unequal numbers of electrons and protons. An atom with a charge, having an unequal number of protons and electrons, is called an ion. Since the sodium atom in salt is missing an electron, it has more protons than electrons, making it a positively charged ion. The chlorine atom becomes a negatively charged ion because it has more electrons than protons. Since positive and negative charges attract each other, The sodium ion and the chloride ion are attracted to each other. This attraction between the oppositely charged ions is called an ionic bond. Since all cells contain and are surrounded by ions, the study of ions and ionic bonding is significant to biological studies. Chemical bonding, covalent. Another type of chemical bonding involves the sharing of electrons. The formation of a water molecule is a good example. Hydrogen has only one electron and requires another to fill its first shell. Oxygen has 8 electrons, 2 in its first shell and 6 in its second shell. 2 more electrons would complete the second shell of the oxygen atom. One oxygen atom will therefore combine with 2 hydrogen atoms. The oxygen shares 1 electron from its second shell with each of the 2 hydrogen atoms, so that each hydrogen atom has a filled shell. The 2 hydrogen atoms share their electrons with the oxygen, so that the oxygen has a filled outer shell. 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to an oxygen atom form a water molecule. These atoms share the 2 pairs of electrons involved in this bond. This sharing of electrons is called a covalent bond. Covalent bonds are relatively strong and do not separate easily. Some ionic bonds are weaker than others, and likewise not all covalent bonds are equally strong. Some chemical bonds are not purely ionic or covalent. They are somewhere between the two and often form substances that behave like both ionic compounds and covalent compounds. Molecules and compounds. In the examples given previously, water and salt, atoms of different elements combine to form molecules. A molecule is a distinct group of atoms bonded together. Most molecules, such as those of water, carbon dioxide, sugar, and fat, are composed of atoms from different elements. Some molecules, however, contain atoms of only a single element. The oxygen in the air is not in the form of single oxygen atoms, but rather 2 oxygen atoms bonded together covalently. Molecular formulas express the number and type of atoms in a molecule. H2O indicates that there are 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen. C6H12. O6 is the molecular formula for the simple sugar glucose. There are 24 atoms represented in this formula: 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms. A compound is a pure substance that is made of 2 or more elements that are chemically combined. A molecule is the smallest unit of a compound that is still that compound in a natural state. A structural formula is often more important in the study of a compound and its reactions with other compounds than the molecular formula. In a structural formula, scientists see where the atoms are actually located and the arrangement of the chemical bonds. Figure 2-6 shows that there are 2 different structures that a molecule of glucose can take. Galactose is another simple sugar that has the same molecular formula as glucose because it has the same number and kinds of atoms. However, in galactose, those atoms are bonded together but in a different configuration. Its structural formula, therefore, is different. Because of its different structure, galactose has properties slightly different from the properties of glucose. Chemical and physical changes. A chemical change takes place when the atoms of a substance bond, i.e., undergo a chemical reaction, with different atoms or compounds. In the examples of water and salt, the new substances have completely different characteristics, or properties, than the individual elements have. Pure sodium is a highly reactive metal that reacts violently with water, producing flammable hydrogen. Chlorine is a very poisonous gas, which, when dissolved in water, is used to kill bacteria in swimming pools. Separately, sodium and chlorine are harmful to living things. But bonded together, they form a crystal that is essential to most living organisms. Hydrogen is a highly combustible gas, and oxygen is a gas necessary for combustion. However, as a compound, they form water, which is used for putting out fires. The following are characteristics of all chemical changes. Chemical changes take place in definite proportions. 10 hydrogen atoms can make only 5 water molecules, no matter how many oxygen molecules are present. New compounds are formed, and/or there is a release of elements. Energy is involved. Not all changes in matter are chemical changes. Adding thermal energy to ice merely causes it to change its state. Such a change is a physical change, the process of altering the state of something, its appearance, or its combination with substances, without involving change in electron sharing or giving. A mixture is formed when two substances are combined without chemical bonding. Forming a mixture involves only a physical change. Since they are not chemically bonded, mixtures can be separated by heating or by mechanical methods. Water and sand do not have definite proportions when mixed together as do chemically bonded compounds. There can be a lot or just a little sand in that mixture. Mixtures maintain the individual properties of the components of which they are made. 2.2 Objectives. Differentiate between kinetic and potential energy. Explain how kinetic energy affects the physical states of matter. Describe how catalysts work. Explain how enzymes work. Key terms: energy, kinetic energy, potential energy, entropy, reactant, product, activation energy, catalyst, enzyme, active site. Substrate. 2.2 Energy. One of the attributes of life discussed in Chapter 1 is that all living things require energy. But what is energy? Energy can be defined as the ability to do work or to cause change. For the purposes of this study, there are two types of energy: kinetic, kinetic, and potential. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion, such as falling, heat, light, and electricity. Potential energy is stored energy, like the energy found in a rock sitting at the top of a cliff, in a log waiting to be burned, or in a battery ready to be connected to a light bulb. In each of these examples, potential energy can be converted into kinetic energy. Pushing the rock, igniting the log, or connecting the battery will start the change from potential to kinetic energy. Kinetic energy can also be converted into potential energy. One of the most important conversions to take place on the Earth is the one in which green plants absorb light energy from the sun and convert it into the potential chemical energy that is stored as sugar. Later, the plant, humans, or other organisms will convert the stored chemical energy in sugar into other forms of energy needed to carry on life. Thermodynamics. The laws of thermodynamics, are man's statements of how energy changes occur. The first law of thermodynamics, sometimes called the law of conservation, states that in any process, energy is neither created nor destroyed. Energy can change from one form to another, but there is always as much at the end as there was at the beginning of the process. The second law of thermodynamics states that whenever energy is used, changed from one form to the other, some of it is rendered unusable, though not destroyed. That is, not all energy put into something is still there at the end of the transfer. Some of the energy radiates out of the object, usually as heat or light. Eventually, this unused energy goes into space. But because of the vastness of space, all the energy that has gone into it has not yet diminished its darkness or even raised its temperature to near the freezing point of water. A natural corollary to the second law of thermodynamics is the law of degeneration. In all natural processes, there is a net increase in disorder and a net loss of usable energy. For reactions such as burning a piece of wood, it is easy to see that the end products, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and ashes, contain much less energy, and that the molecules are much more random than before the burning took place. This increase in randomness and loss of usable energy is termed entropy in troop P. Some reactions, however, appear to contradict the law of degeneration. Green plants use light energy to make sugar from water and carbon dioxide. This conversion of kinetic energy to potential energy and of simple substances to a larger, more orderly substance requires the plant to use more energy than is contained in the new molecule, and is a result of the law of conservation. This process permits the growth and reproduction of plants. At first glance, the first and second laws of thermodynamics appear to be in contradiction. Actually, however, they work in God-ordained harmony. For example, living things build complex substances according to the law of conservation. In time, the living organism will either store the energy in molecules or release the energy in the form of heat or motion. When the organism dies, energy is released as its molecules decompose. The use or release of the energy by the organism is in keeping with the law of degeneration. This balance is discussed in more detail throughout the text. Kinetic molecular energy. It may be surprising to some to learn that each of the molecules that make up this book is wiggling. All of the molecules that make up every substance have a certain amount of kinetic energy. Even solid substances are composed of moving molecules. The amount of thermal energy in a substance determines how fast its molecules move, and subsequently its physical state. In ice, for example, molecular motion is slight. The individual water molecules barely move. However, in liquid water, the movement is greater because it contains more thermal energy. The increase in thermal energy causes some of the bonds between the water molecules in ice to be broken. As the water molecules are heated to 100 degrees Celsius, 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the boiling point of water, they become so active that many leave the surface of the fluid as water vapor, a gas. Potential energy of a molecule. Living things are made up of molecules. The potential energy that fuels the processes of life is stored in the bonds between these molecules' atoms. Energy changes occur during the reactions that form these molecules, as well as those that break them down. Chemical reactions fall into two basic groups. Those that require or absorb heat are called endothermic, and those that give off heat are called exothermic. For example, heat is required to make cake batter solidify into the cake that is eaten. This is an endothermic reaction. A piece of wood gives off thermal and light energy as it burns. This reaction is exothermic. Let the letters A and B represent two elements or compounds before they chemically react with one another, the reactants. And let C and D be the compounds that are the results or products of the chemical reaction. The reaction could be written like this: A plus B equals C plus D. This chemical equation is read: A plus B yields the products C plus D. An example of a chemical reaction is the formation of sugar by photosynthesis. Its simplified chemical equation is written this way: 6H2O plus 6CO2, C6H12O6 plus 6O2. The water, H2O, and the carbon dioxide, CO2, are the reactants, and the sugar, C6H12O6, and the oxygen, O2, are the products of this reaction. The energy given off or absorbed in a reaction is often represented in the chemical equation. If the reaction between A and B is exothermic, giving off thermal energy, the reaction is written like this: A plus B equals C plus D plus energy. Assume that the reaction between W and X requires thermal energy to become Y and Z. This endothermic reaction is written this way: W plus X plus energy arrow, Y plus Z. But where does the energy required for baking a cake or for any other endothermic reaction go? In the endothermic reaction above, energy does not appear on the product side of the arrow. Does all the energy therefore escape into the atmosphere? Not at all. The products contain some of the energy. Where does the energy given off by a burning piece of wood or from any other exothermic reaction come from? In an exothermic reaction, the energy released is contained in the substances that enter the reaction. Whenever atoms take, give, or share electrons, energy is involved. Combining smaller molecules to form larger molecules requires energy. Generally, in living things, when the molecules combine by sharing electrons, energy is supplied to some of those electrons. With the exception of the energy that escapes, the energy supplied is still there in the form of chemical bond energy. In the previous chapter, the need for a constant supply of energy is listed as one of the attributes of life. One of the reasons for this requirement is that living organisms must constantly make large, complex molecules. These molecules are the very substance of the organism itself. The food you eat supplies you not only with the energy you use to move, but also with the energy necessary to build the complex molecules that form cells. Catalysts and enzymes. Many reactions are spontaneous. That is, whenever the proper substances come into contact with one another, the reaction immediately takes place. For instance, the combining of sodium and chlorine is spontaneous. Other reactions, however, require energy to start them. Paper does not burn when only oxygen is present. The molecules in a piece of paper must be heated to a certain point before the reaction will start. Once started, this reaction is exothermic and supplies the thermal energy necessary for other molecules to carry on the reaction as well. The energy necessary to start a reaction is called the activation energy. Activation energy is often in the form of thermal energy, but for other reactions it may be electrical, light, nuclear, or some other form of energy. Some reactions, such as burning wood, happen very rapidly, even explosively. Others, such as the combining of iron and oxygen to form rust, happen slowly. To control reactions, scientists may use catalysts, ISTs, substances that affect the rate of a reaction, but are not themselves changed in the reaction. Catalysts reduce the amount of activation energy required for the reaction. Specific chemicals serve as catalysts for specific reactions, so there is not one catalyst for speeding up all reactions and another for slowing down all reactions. Many chemical reactions have no known catalyst. In a chemical equation, the catalyst is indicated over the arrow. A chemical reaction with its catalyst is written this way: A plus B, catalyst, C plus D plus energy. All living things must carry out thousands of chemical reactions, each one either requiring or releasing energy, and must repeat these reactions many times. Many of these reactions occur too slowly, or have activation energies that are too high to be practical for the organism. Enzymes are the compounds that serve as organic catalysts that speed up chemical reactions, sometimes over 1,000,000 times faster. How does this happen? Enzymes lower the activation energy of the reaction. Figure 2-12 shows how an enzyme operates. From left to right, the drawing represents the kind of enzyme that breaks a molecule apart. One part of the surface of the enzyme is called the active site. The active site fits with the shape of the substrate, which is the molecule that the enzyme will bind with. The shape of the active site of the enzyme is specific for the substrate. It will fit no other. The combination of the enzyme and substrate is called the enzyme-substrate complex. While they are together, the shape of the enzyme is slightly altered and weakens some of the chemical bonds in the substrate, which is how scientists believe that the activation energy is lowered. The changed substrate is called the product. Notice that the enzyme is unchanged at the end. It has merely helped the reaction to take place. Characteristics of enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. Although there are exceptions, most enzymes are proteins. Enzymes are highly specific. The enzyme that catalyzes the reactions between two sugar molecules will work only with those two sugar molecules, or with molecules that are almost identical to them. Many enzymes require energy to perform their functions. Without the proper supply of energy, enzymatic reactions cease. Therefore, life ceases. Many enzymes release energy as they perform their functions. Normally, the amount of energy released in a single enzymatic reaction is small. This energy can therefore be trapped and temporarily stored for use in reactions that require energy. Because the amount of energy released during enzymatic reactions is controlled, cells are not destroyed by too much heat energy being released at one time. Enzymes often require coenzymes. All coenzymes are substances that fit into or affect the active site so that it accepts the substrate properly. Without an adequate supply of coenzymes, enzymes do not function. Some important coenzymes are vitamins. Enzyme action is affected by heat, radiation, pH, and chemicals. Any of these can cause the enzyme to function improperly, or not at all, thereby causing illness or death. Enzymes most often work in series. A molecule of sugar, for example, is broken down by a series of enzymes in succession. Each one may either break off, add an atom or molecule, or change the shape of the substrate. 2.3 Objectives. Define solution, solvent, and solute. List the important molecular characteristics of water. Differentiate between diffusion and osmosis. Explain the difference between acids and bases. Key terms: solution, solute, solvent, concentration, diffusion, equilibrium, polar molecule, cohesion, adhesion, concentration gradient, Semi-permeable membrane. Acid, base, pH, buffer, osmosis. 2.3 solutions. Living things are mostly water. The average human body contains approximately 45.4 liters, 12 gallons of water. The other substances of life are in some way dissolved or suspended in water. The characteristics of the watery combinations that make up living things are vastly different, depending on what substances are in the water. A solution is a homogeneous mixture of one or more substances within another substance. A homogeneous mixture is one that is the same throughout. The kinetic energy of the molecules in the solution keeps the solution uniformly mixed. When sugar is dissolved in a glass of water, it forms a solution. The molecules of sugar are equally distributed throughout the water, and as long as the sugar does not settle out, the sugar water is a solution. The substance that is dissolved, sugar, is called the solute, and the substance in which it is dissolved, water, is called the solvent. Solutes are generally made of ions or small molecules, and often several different solutes will be in a single solution. An example is blood plasma, the non-cellular portion of blood. It contains water, the solvent, and many dissolved substances such as gases, molecules, and ions, as well as many other substances. The composition of solutions is not fixed. The proportions of the solutes in the solvent can vary. The concentration of a solution is the ratio of the solute in the solvent. Concentration percentages are often found on bottle labels. For example, a 10% glucose, C6H12O6, solution contains 10 grams of glucose dissolved in enough water to make 100 grams of solution. The more solute in the solution, the greater the concentration. Since living things are mostly water, most of the biologically important chemical reactions occur in an aqueous solution, a solution for which the solvent is water. The solutions around and within cells are aqueous solutions, and the chemical reactions necessary for life occur in these watery solutions. Suspensions and colloids. One mixture often seen in biological studies is a suspension. Suspensions are mixtures in which the kinetic energy of the molecules is not sufficient to maintain the large solute particles evenly dispersed within the solvent. They may or may not be homogeneous. If left undisturbed, the particles of a suspension will eventually settle out due to gravity. Blood is an example of a suspension. A portion of blood plasma, is a solution of water with dissolved ions, but larger objects such as blood cells are suspended and will settle out if the blood does not circulate. Colloids are mixtures in which the dispersed particles are too large to completely dissolve. Those smaller colloidal particles, usually small solids, at 1 to 1,000 nanometers in size, are maintained in suspension by molecular collisions. The particles stay in suspension and do not settle out. Colloids may exist in two states. In the Sol phase, the colloid is fluid, and there is little attraction between the colloidal particles. In the gel phase, the colloid acts as a solid, often forming a semi-solid material. The material within a cell is a complete type of colloid, alternating between the Sol and gel phases. Diffusion. Diffusion is one of the most important physical processes that affects organisms. The proper concentration of solutes inside and outside the cell is highly critical to its continued existence. Diffusion is the net movement of molecules from an area of higher concentration of a substance to an area of lower concentration of that substance. Net movement, in this definition, means the number of molecules that moved from the higher concentration area minus those that moved back into the higher concentration area. When there are no longer places of higher and lower concentrations, a state of equilibrium, equilibrium, has been reached and diffusion stops. In Figure 2-14, a tube connects two containers, A and B, and a cloth barrier has been placed in the tube to separate the two containers. Next, water is placed in container A and molasses in container B. Because the water side has no molasses molecules and the molasses side has relatively fewer water molecules, a concentration gradient is established. A concentration gradient is the difference between the numbers of one type of molecule in two adjacent areas. In this example, the concentration gradient is high for water on side A and high for molasses on side B. A high concentration gradient indicates that the difference is very great. A low concentration gradient indicates that there is little difference. The two areas of high concentration will seek to establish equilibrium, and the molecules will tend to flow down the concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to one of lower concentration. The diffusion pressure, which is based on the relative concentrations of the adjacent areas, in this case the water and molasses molecules, is very high in stage 1 of figure 2-14 because the molasses and water are each strongly concentrated and no mixing has occurred. Diffusion occurs rapidly when the diffusion pressure is high. Since the molecules of both water and molasses can easily pass through the cloth barrier, diffusion happens in both directions. A barrier that allows passage of all molecules is said to be permeable. P-U-R-M-E-A-B-I-L. After a period of time, the concentration gradient decreases as the number of water molecules and the number of molasses molecules on each side even out, and diffusion slows. The individual molecules are not slowing down, though. They continue to move because of the kinetic energy they possess. As long as the temperature remains the same, the molecules will continue to move at the same rate. As diffusion continues, the number of molecules moving out of the areas of high concentration approaches the number of molecules moving into the areas of high concentration. That is, about the same number of molasses molecules are entering side A and leaving side B in stage 3. The same is true for the water molecules. Diffusion, it should be remembered, is the net movement. Although these molecules continue to move, the gain in number on the lower concentration side is not as great as it was. As the concentrations of water and molasses get closer, diffusion pressure decreases and diffusion slows down. In time, equilibrium will be reached. Osmosis. If instead of a cloth, a membrane having very small pores is placed between the molasses and water, the results are different. If the membrane's pores are so small that they will permit the water molecules to pass through, but will not permit the larger molasses molecules to pass through, it is a semi-permeable, SME-permeable membrane, or selectively permeable membrane. It is selective to some things, but not to others. Living organisms have many selectively permeable membranes. If a semi-permeable membrane separates water and molasses having high concentration gradients, the membrane will allow only water molecules to pass through and move into the molasses. Diffusion of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane is osmosis, HZMOHSS. The large molasses molecules, however, are not able to move into the water because of the small size of the pores in the semi-permeable membrane. As the water moves across the membrane to the molasses side, the water level falls on side A, forcing the level higher on side B. Will this unequal movement of water molecules into the molasses ever produce an equal concentration of molasses and water molecules on each side? No, that result is impossible in this case. Nor can the water molecules continue going through the membrane until all the water has moved to the molasses side, even though a continuous concentration gradient exists, because the molasses cannot enter the water. Eventually, the net movement of water molecules into the molasses will decrease. At that point, osmosis, the net movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane, will cease, even though the concentrations are not equal. Molecules of water will continue to move back and forth across the membrane, but there will be no net gain or loss of water. Facets of biology. Water, life's essential molecule. Water is so ordinary and plain that a person rarely thinks about it unless he is hot and thirsty or looking for a pool on a hot summer day. It is colorless, tasteless, and odorless, yet God uniquely designed water to sustain all of his creation. The human body is about 65% water. Without water, a person would die within just a few days. The chemical reactions that maintain life take place in the watery environment of cells. Polarity. Water is composed of two hydrogen atoms covalently bonded to one oxygen atom. Although these atoms are sharing the electrons, the sharing is unequal. The oxygen atom pulls the shared electrons a little closer to its nucleus, making the area around the oxygen atom more negatively charged than the area around the hydrogen atoms. This uneven charge around the water molecule gives it a distinctive positive area, or pole, and a negative pole. A molecule with charged poles is said to be a polar molecule. Hydrogen bonding. The polar characteristic of the water molecule attracts not only other molecules and ions, but also other molecules of water. The positive pole of one water molecule attracts the negative pole of another water molecule. This hydrogen bonding occurs as the hydrogen of one molecule is attracted to the negative region of another water molecule. Hydrogen bonding gives water some other biologically important characteristics. Water is often referred to as the universal solvent because it will dissolve so many different compounds, especially other polar compounds. When sodium chloride dissolves in water, the positive sodium ions are attracted to the negative portions of the water molecules, and the negative chloride ions are attracted to the positive poles of the water molecules. Substances that are not polar, such as vegetable oil, will not be dissolved by water. Hydrogen bonding is also responsible for two other important characteristics of water. Cohesion, the attraction between molecules of the same substance, causes water droplets to bead up and also allows some insects and spiders to skate on the surface of water. The attraction between the molecules of different substances, known as adhesion, is one of the forces that helps water move to the tops of stems and leaves. As long as the other substance is polar, water molecules will be attracted or adhere. Water and temperature change. Everyone knows that solid water, ice, floats. But what happens when another liquid, alcohol, is frozen? Unlike solid water, solid alcohol sinks. In fact, most liquids contract and sink when they reach a solid state. Cold-designed water with its unique molecular structure and hydrogen bonding so that as it solidifies, it expands. This expansion makes ice less dense, allowing it to float. Therefore, water freezes from the top down. The ice that forms on the surface of a lake acts as a barrier and shields the relatively warm water below, an important factor in the survival of fish and other aquatic organisms. Why does it seem to take forever for a pan of water to boil? A property called specific heat requires a large amount of thermal energy to be absorbed before a temperature change in water. This property, when water is initially heated, most of the thermal energy is used to break the hydrogen bonds between the molecules. Only after these bonds are broken does the kinetic energy increase enough to cause an increase in temperature. This property is important biologically. The high specific heat of water can hold enough thermal energy to affect the temperature of the environment around them. Warm ocean currents can moderate the temperatures of coastal communities when the inland areas are much colder. At the cellular level, the ability of water to help moderate temperature changes aids the cell in maintaining temperature equilibrium with its surroundings. Facets of biology/acids, bases, and buffers. Most substances, when dissolved in water, are either acids or bases. Most chemical reactions, especially those that take place in living things, are affected by whether they are taking place in an acid or a base, and by how strong the acid or base is. Acids and bases are really opposites, which when they get together, do not fight, but they do destroy each other. An acid is a compound that donates hydrogen ions H+ when it is dissolved in water. A base is a compound that releases hydroxide ions, O-, when it is dissolved in water. When an acid and a base are put together, they neutralize each other, forming a salt and water. For example, sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid will combine and form sodium chloride, table salt, and water. NaOH plus HCl equals NaCl plus H2O. The acidity, amount of hydrogen ions, or alkalinity, amount of hydroxide ions of a solution, is usually expressed in terms of a value called pH. For biologists, the useful pH scale goes from 0, very acidic, to 14, very alkaline. A pH reading of 7 is neutral, meaning the solution has no excess H plus or OH minus ions. Living things and pH. The pH of the environment surrounding living things is crucial. Some fish that normally live in water with a pH of 6.5 will begin to show signs of distress when placed in water with a pH of 6.0, and if placed in water with a pH of 5, they die. The internal pH of living things is also important. Human stomach enzymes work best if the pH of the stomach juices is between 1.6 and 2.4. Sometimes a person's stomach may secrete too much acid for too long, causing a sour stomach. The acid attacks the lining of the digestive system, causing a person to have a burning sensation, often called heartburn, even though it has nothing to do with the heart. A common over-the-counter treatment for acid indigestion is the use of antacids. Antacids neutralize the excess hydrochloric acid, thus raising the pH. Strong antacids, if overused, can even raise the stomach contents above neutral. Buffers. Another means of pH regulation are buffers that keep the pH within a tolerable range. A buffer is a substance that will combine with either H plus or OH minus ions, whichever is in excess. Human blood, for example, maintains a pH of between 7.35 and 7.45 using buffers. If an acidic substance enters the blood, the buffers will quickly pick up the excess H plus ions. The reverse would happen if an alkaline substance gets into the blood. There are, of course, limits. If someone gets too much of an acid in his blood, the buffers may not be able to handle all the ions. His blood pH would go down, and he could die from a coma. If it drops too far, he would die. The brain cells can tolerate only small pH fluctuations beyond the normal range. Common acids and bases. Acids: hydrochloric acid, HCl. Sulfuric acid, H2SO4. Carbonic acid, H2CO3. Bases: sodium hydroxide, NaOH. Calcium hydroxide, C. A open parenthesis O, H close parenthesis 2.